Westbrook Health Services has been supporting the surrounding community since 1949 and is known as an agency that is community-focused, people-driven. As one of West Virginia's 13 comprehensive behavioral health centers, Westbrook provides services to 8 counties throughout the Mountaineer State and became one of the first comprehensive community behavioral health clinics in West Virginia in 2020. This podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous help of the Sisters Health Foundation. This year marks 25 years since the foundation awarded its first grant, and we couldn't be more grateful for their support. Welcome to Studio 2121.
Hello, again, this is Kevin Trippett with Westbrook Health Services, and we are recording our 11th podcast episode. And today I have John Leidy with me. He is the director of the SUD Collaborative for the Mid-Ohio Valley. Welcome, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited about you being here. And probably the first question people might not know when they hear SUD Collaborative is, what is a SUD Collaborative?
Yeah, it's a good question. It could be hard to describe too sometimes,
Yeah.
But basically the collaborative came about through a group of foundations in town. The United Way, McDonough Foundation, Sisters Health Foundation, Parkersburg Area Community Foundation, and the Fenton Foundation. Really, they were having conversations about, they all were funding different initiatives related to SUD. They all certainly had an interest in seeing us make a larger impact in the community around that issue, but they didn't necessarily feel like their dollars were having as much impact as they hoped. And so they brought together a couple of different community conversations around what could they do better. And what they heard was that having someone in a full-time role focused on bringing the community together to address this issue could be effective. And so they decided to fund this collaborative with the goal of identifying what the community's needs are, hopefully building partnerships that can address those needs, as well as focus on bringing in some outside best practices as well that maybe the community hadn't embraced yet.
Yeah, I was part of those initial conversations before they put this together, and it was interesting to think about all the different providers that are out there that weren't necessarily talking to each other, maybe doing duplicative, or not knowing what others were doing. It was a great model, I think, to bring some collaboration amongst providers and to be able to provide the best care to our clients and our communities.
Yeah, I'll say, my background really isn't even in substance use disorder, so I'll never claim to be the expert in that regard, but I've worked in a number of these collaborative roles through nonprofits, and so while we're faced with a lot of challenges here, I don't think we're unique in that regard by any means. I've seen kind of that duplication of services and lack of communication in every community I've worked in, so hopefully we can make an impact and continue to see some progress through this effort.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of that, what has been your accomplishment so far?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've done since I've been in this role has really been focused on workforce development for individuals that have been impacted by substance use disorders. So we were successful with our partners in getting a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission through their Inspire initiative, really focused on building out what they refer to as the recovery to work ecosystem. And so what that means is making sure that as people are coming out of treatment and recovery programs, they're able to access services and kind of stay on the pathway to getting into the workforce or being eligible to return to the workforce. So we've partnered with Jobs and Hope West Virginia, SW Resources here in town, COAD over in Athens, Ohio, and then also Southeastern Ohio Legal Services to really ensure that we have the ability to meet people's needs and help them coordinate that transition or that continuum, but also offer training services. And one of the biggest things that we heard through that process was really the difficulty is that services weren't aligned across the river between West Virginia and Ohio. So a lot of our focus has been on taking what's working in one state and making it available to the other. Beyond that, though, we've also really focused on collecting better data, so making sure that we have a really good understanding of what this issue is, but most importantly, what we can do to move forward. So we're working with Deb Keister at Marshall to really pull together some comprehensive data that will hopefully continue to refine and make relevant. But beyond that, we've also just offered a number of learning opportunities focused on, emerging trends and best practices related to substance use disorders.
Great. Really, somebody in recovery, especially early stages of recovery, not having meaningful work can make that recovery process a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important to try to help individuals get back into the workforce, feel like they're providing contributing to society.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great, trying to help gather those resources together. I know we find it very beneficial when we have clients coming out of our programs. That's one of our goals, is to help them find work, and so that's been very helpful in that aspect.
Yeah, I would say fortunately too, we're lucky in this community that there are a lot of employers that are recovery friendly or open to hiring people in recovery. But one of the things that we're focused on now is bringing a program called CORE here to our region, or creating opportunities for recovery employment. They're having success in southern West Virginia, but really their focus is on helping employers really understand what it means to be recovery friendly. So it's one thing to hire folks that have been impacted, but it's another thing to really know what that means. And so offering the availability to go to group appointments, so it's flexible scheduling, ensuring that they're meeting kind of the requirements of the ADA in regards to substance use disorders. So hopefully we can be successful in bringing that program here, and then we'll have an even stronger recovery-friendly employer community.
Just curious, with that program, in addition to making those accommodations, do they also train the employer on signs to look for in case the employee's slipping, so they know when to try to get the person help?
Absolutely. So they've put together a pretty comprehensive toolkit that I can share the link with for you. But I was in partnership with the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce, and really it goes through all of those different aspects. So what it takes to really hire someone successfully, what it takes to be supportive of your current employees and make sure that if they are at risk or seeing any of those signs, they know how to refer, making sure that they have policies in place that are supportive of things like MAT and other treatment programs. So if they go through the whole gamut.
That's awesome. You mentioned collecting data points. Have you found anything interesting, any trends or anything that you would like to share about that?
So I think a lot of what our initial data has been focused on is really what's available in town. And so a lot of this goes back to kind of the current climate that we're faced with here locally. So I think, everyone's aware that moratoriums were passed to limit new treatment and recovery beds. I think there's a lot of belief that certain things are occurring in our community because of these services, and so we wanted to really be able to point to, well, what's actually taking place versus what's just being said maybe in the newspaper.
Right.
And so a lot of what we've looked at is things like, how many treatment beds are operating in town, how many other services are there that can support those treatment beds and make them effective. And really what we're finding, which I don't think is a surprise to you certainly, is just that continuum kind of stops after initial treatment, largely, I think, in our community. And so there's a great need, I think, for us to really focus in on, we do have the most treatment beds in the state. How can we build out the services to support folks as they're leaving those programs and making sure that they're maintaining their success in recovery? And so, unfortunately, what we've found is we already had a low number of recovery programs operating in the community, and that's actually decreased over the last year due to some of the programs not being able to meet some standards that have been passed by the state. So yeah, I think that's been the most troubling. But I think what that data is enabling us to do is have conversations with decision makers in the region as well as at the state level about the need for those additional services.
Yeah, I kind of look at the whole housing situation almost like a math formula. When you get into the most intensive level of service, it's a shorter stay, so you can have a higher turnover of beds, and so you don't need as many beds. As you progress through the treatment continuum and the stays are longer and longer, then the number of bed capacity has to grow to accommodate those individuals. Now, I know not everybody will continue to seek residential services as you go down the line. But where we are right now with all the treatment beds we have, yes, maybe we have a little too much, but we're nowhere near what we need for recovery beds. When individuals are leaving treatment, they don't have a place to go. Many of them aren't ready to live on their own yet, but they still don't need intensive treatment. They just need a place that's safe for them to stay as they continue employment opportunities and continue their recovery path. So the moratorium is probably maybe it may even made things worse because the individuals no longer have a way to continue staying on the path of recovery. So
I mean, I kind of see, both sides of the argument for the moratorium, where I think there was a need to say we need to slow the growth of treatment beds, not so much that there wasn't demand for those services, but more, let's make sure that those beds are as effective as possible by having the services to support them. And so I think it's good to slow, some of that growth until we figure out, but at the same time, certainly there is a need for the rest of that continuum, and I don't think the moratorium does anything to help promote those services. So yeah, I think that's something certainly that I've had conversations with folks at the state about, is how could we direct dollars to build that out. And not just build out opportunities for housing, but make sure that they're effective programs. So making sure that they're able to meet with our guidelines and some of those other things that can ensure quality in those services.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm guessing you probably don't get client data, so you're not are able to track individuals as far as how many people are falling out of services, how many overdoses. I mean, if that's not the data you're getting.
No, but that is something that I have an interest in working with provider organizations, which I think I've had a conversation with you about before, is the state, whether it be through the recently passed Senate Bill 419 or some other mechanism, I think has an interest in pushing their payments for these services towards value-based contracts. And so I think what I have an interest in, and hopefully we can catalyze here in the next few months, would really be working with local treatment organizations to say, whether these payment contracts are going to be put in place within the next year, 5 years, they're going to be coming at some point. So what can we do to get ready? And I think one of the things would be looking at some of those measures. So what does tell us that this program is effective? How do we track that? Are there technology pieces that we need to put in place in order to be able to do some of that? So no, we're not collecting that data yet, but I think hopefully we can get there soon.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that always intrigues me is looking at statistics between MAT and strictly abstinence, because you have people on both sides of the fence. They don't want to say you can't do abstinence or you can't do MAT, and really for me it's about what works best for the client. Are they able to get through for a heroin addiction? Are they able to go straight abstinence and deal with that pain, or is MAT a more gradual approach that works for them? It's different for everybody, but what we struggle with in this community a lot of times is people don't want you to be on MAT to be in my program, not understanding that. So I think there's some education there that we need to do. But look, to help with that, getting back to the data, what do the numbers support? Are people more successful one way or the other?
Absolutely. I think it goes to the point of, naloxone. That's another area where I think people say, well, we should be promoting this, or others will say, no, this isn't doing any favors. And so just educating people on really what that does and how effective it can be is critical.
One of the ways I try to address naloxone when asked, I can help somebody recover if they're still alive. I can't if they aren't. And so, you hope that naloxone is available if someone's overdosing so that their life might be saved, that you can talk them into treatment and get them on a path of recovery.
Absolutely.
I don't know, you may be aware of this, we just recently got approved to purchase fentanyl test kits. So we are working on, in some places, especially when a bad batch of drugs come in and someone's got at least with fentanyl, to get that in the community so people know what they're taking before they take it. Again, it's a life-saving measure because fentanyl is so deadly, and it's a touch point. So people may think, well, you're encouraging somebody to use drugs, but that's not really what we're doing. We're encouraging somebody to be safe and hopefully showing that you care for that individual, you can get them interested in coming and getting treatment and getting on the recovery path. So.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the more opportunities to access treatment, the better.
Yeah.
Is that through the state's Office of Drug Control Policy?
Yes, this was one
Raj
of our
is leading.
grants. Yep.
Okay. Yep.
It took a while. The federal government would not allow the funds to be spent that way because the fentanyl test kits were listed as drug paraphernalia. But they recently changed that view.
That's great.
And so we got that lifted. Yeah, so another thing, with you being out in the community and coordinating services, hopefully there's people out there in the community that are thinking, well, I'd like to help, and there's things that I would like to do to help advance those efforts. So what are ways community members might be able to assist?
Yeah, so I think going back to the point you just made, one of the easiest things that I think community members could do is just learn about this issue. So learn about the differences between a treatment program and a recovery program. Because I think so much of the current debate around these services in our community is maybe being driven by a lack of awareness of what those services really do or how they're operating. So I think, as many opportunities as folks can just to learn about not just what the programs are doing, but what the state's doing to really ensure that if a recovery home is out opening in your community or your neighborhood, here are the things that we're holding them accountable for. So it's not just the Wild West, so to speak.
Right.
Beyond that, though, I think, carrying naloxone is certainly something that could be helpful. And there's plenty of opportunities in the state where you can have it actually just shipped to your home for free. So that's always something that is a best practice to ensure that you can save a life if that opportunity ever arises. But beyond that, I think just volunteering too, especially post-COVID. So many of the services that are critical to our recovery community have just been impacted so heavily with volunteers. So things like transportation services that still have not seen their volunteer numbers get back to where they were prior to COVID, and is limiting the ability for individuals to get rides to treatment or other critical services. So go out and just volunteer with some of those local programs, ensure that we're able to deliver those services to people in need.
You mentioned being educated on naloxone and maybe even taking a kit in case you run into someone in the community or a family member. You never know. In the middle of September, and I don't remember the exact date, unfortunately, I just learned about this today, there's going to be a statewide initiative. So all 55 counties, different organizations are going to be distributing naloxone in those counties. Westbrook is actually working on Wood and Tyler counties. We will be the point agency for those two counties. So stay tuned for that. Look for that date if you are interested in getting educated in naloxone. But we will be hopefully flooding communities with that.
That's great.
Life-saving substance. So great. So what are some exciting things that you've seen from different providers in the community?
Yeah, I mean, through our work through workforce development, I think we're seeing a lot of great programs being developed around workforce development training for folks that have been impacted by this issue. Traditionally, some of those programs weren't necessarily geared for someone that had those unique circumstances in their background, and so programs like SW Resources, which I've already mentioned, Goodwill is another organization in town offering that. Certainly WVUP has some resources available, but just ensuring that people that are in recovery have the ability to go and get job training skills, because that is so critical to maintaining that sobriety and building that sense of community and purpose. Beyond that, I think programs like Jobs and Hope are certainly having a lot of success. That's a state-backed program that's really helping coordinate services for people that are really seeking employment, and so they do a number of things beyond coordination, but also offering legal assistance, certainly transportation resources, all sorts of different things that if you're in recovery yourself and you're interested in getting into the workforce, certainly I would be reaching out to them and just finding out everything that's available to you through the state of West Virginia. But then beyond that, I think programs like Westbrook, certainly all the treatment organizations we have in town, just offering that incredible access that I would say Parkersburg Wood County residents have to treatment. But your continued focus on expanding those services by building programs like Amity and Genesis and Exodus certainly are exciting in my opinion.
Yeah, you mentioned the Jobs and Hope program. We have a peer that works closely with that program, and Rebecca Gandy, and she goes out and helps these individuals get back to work. And some of the things that we're able to do is buy work boots, buy work appropriate clothing, any other types of needs that helps people get into the workforce. So we have those resources available as well. We recently was granted a grant from the McDonough Foundation. With that money, we are working on hiring a part-time driver whose sole job will be to help individuals in recovery get back and forth to work. So yeah, there are a lot of exciting things to try to get rid of barriers and entry back into work. It's an employee's market right now. It's not hard to find a job. There's a lot of people looking. We have 70 vacancies ourselves across our agency with all the needs we have for employment. So not suggesting everybody should be working for us, but we certainly welcome individuals who want to come work for us because we have a need. But if you have a need to get into the workforce, we can not only maybe potentially employ you, but help you find work. So
that's great.
Yeah.
I would say too, another exciting thing, somewhat because of a sad situation, I would say very much because of a sad situation, but there's just so much money available right now focused on these services, whether it be through CARES dollars, through the COVID money, or the opioid settlement funds that are coming down, where I think we're in a very unique opportunity now to really impact lasting change because all of that funding is available. There's still a lot of questions that remain about how those dollars are going to be allocated or when, but I think we're in a really exciting time in terms of addressing this issue because of all those resources that are coming down into our community.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a lot of the topics I had today about the SUD Collaborative, and I appreciate you coming in. I am curious on a personal level, how do you deal with stress?
Yeah. So for me, primarily it's yard work anymore. My girlfriend and I bought a house about a year ago, so now it's going out and cutting grass and doing some meditation while I'm doing that. But
nice.
At work, I've practiced with breathing exercises and some other techniques, but getting outside seems to be the best for me.
Yeah. I like being outside as well.
Yeah.
So, as many people of you have heard our podcast before, I like to run. I'm training for a marathon right now.
Oh, great.
But that time running clears my mind. I get to think about things that I don't normally have a chance to think about. Sometimes that's your best work, is when you're outside of work and not having the stress and pressures of work. So that's awesome.
Now, you wouldn't know it by looking at me, but I'm a cyclist as well,
okay.
And so I kind of get the same thing though. Kind of get the same thing there, where I'd never really understood what meditation was until someone described it to me as when you're doing an endurance activity like that and you lose your mind. That's really meditating.
Right. Yeah.
That was the first time it ever made sense to me. So
clearing your mind and losing all thought. Yeah, which I never really knew the impact that could have until I've done it. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.